project-based learning, there's a new school in the UK. There's started funding free schools, a bit like the charter schools in the US, and one that started this year, which is going to be based on project-based learning from the start. And what's quite exciting is it means that teachers work together. So teachers from different disciplines, instead of saying we're in an English lesson or a history lesson, the teachers work together as a team. So there's a lot more expertise teaching, and also their roles change. They're more like facilitators. So they're supporting the children's learning. There's another example, which is quite wonderful about Ron Berger and project-based learning, is somewhere where he's got a child draws a butterfly. And it's the same idea, that he draws the butterfly the first time. He's about a 6-year-old child. And by the end, it's such a professional drawing that becomes a postcard that's sold all over the state. So it's quite wonderful to looking at reflecting. The other part, which is quite interesting about moving away from grading, is entering more into dialogue. So something called dialogic learning, where you're looking at feedback, which a lot of schools and staff have started doing, where teachers will give feedback, students will do peer assessments, and they'll do their own feedback of their peers, and their own assessments are slowly improving their own work. And in many ways, they respect their peers more than just being told off by a teacher or being given, even if it's constructive or helpful comments from a teacher. So there are lots of new ways that you can look at helping people get towards an endpoint, but then we're still trying to teach with maybe an expected endpoint. And what's quite exciting about the projects is you don't really know where they're going, and it's involving a whole community. You've got old people and young people of all different walks of life, experiences, artisans and specialists. And you do get that in some aspects of early years education. So the Reggio Emilia stuff that's come from Italy, which is quite beautiful about how get it involving and working with artists and other specialists and working with early years to create high standard projects, is another way of getting people from outside the classroom into the classroom.
I find very interesting that it's focused on mastery, because when I think about the school projects we had at school, it wasn't about mastery, it was about delivering the project, which probably wasn't very good quality, but no one really cared to how to make it better next time. So that I find really, really interesting.
Yeah, that's it. That's the perfect word. It's mastery. It is about mastery, and that's the focus of learning. I think there's their idea that you can master, and that mastery is a lot of work. If you're going to learn an instrument, you've got to put all the hours in. The language, the same thing. It's about that determination and that having that motivation, the intrinsic motivation, inspiring that, and that power of the will to keep going. Yeah, so it's quite exciting, really. It's moving away from the hierarchy in the classroom as well. So if you've got lots of adults that are supporting you, or teachers that are working together, then you're not saying that somebody knows more because they're the teacher. There's this big teamwork, and then they can see teamwork in action between staff. Then the students can model that. And maybe a way forward is not just having the same age children together. For example, in Montessori, they use a lot of mixed age classrooms, and that's one of the really strong things there about theirs is there's a lot of resources that children can choose, and they're in charge of their learning then. So there's a lot more child-led learning to what they're doing in their work, but also that mixture of ages. Older children can help younger children, but also younger children can help older children, and they can, a bit like society, we don't all live in worlds of the same age. So that's really cool. And so there's a lot of variety in progressive education. And some people see it as a bit stuck in the 70s, of being the radical 1970s approach. But I think that the schools that are really moving with the times are looking at all these things, like I said before, about mindfulness, looking at this element of our spiritual being as well as being free individuals in this personalised learning.
Can we return to the assessment? When it's project-based, is it usually done by feedback or conversation dialogue?
Again, it depends on how the school's doing it, but when I've done some project-based learning work with teenagers, it worked in a variety of ways where I would give feedback, and then I would work on peer assessment and self-assessment, and then on improving their own work that they were doing. But the other places, they still might have to grade. It might be an expectation of the area, of the the council or the schools, but it's mostly written. But it could be, in a more modern way, it could be done by using film, it could be by having conversations, or as a class. In most schools, this is what I did my master's dissertation on, was I was sick of the children being bribed, basically, to behave. And it can be quite simple when you're younger children, being saying good girl all the time. Or somebody draws a picture and they say, my picture's rubbish. And they're waiting for you to say, no, your picture's brilliant. So there's this spiral of reinforcement, which isn't really about being happy with yourself and your own work. So there's quite a lot of work looking at how you praise and being much more descriptive in your praise. So instead of saying good girl or that's a lovely picture, you can say I'm impressed by this, or maybe not even having the word impressed, but oh, why is that red? Or just entering into a dialogue, back to the dialogue before, I suppose, about the work. So the student can say, oh, cool, that red's the fire that the dragon's breathing, or I wrote this poem because this thing happened to me. And you're getting much more of a connection, and the child wants to learn then and wants to show off what they've been doing in a really positive environment, rather than just to be told that they're a good girl. Yeah, and the grades thing is scary, because in a lot of UK classrooms they have a chart on the wall where the children who are more academic can move up the chart. So if you're top of the class, you get higher up, and if you misbehave in class, you can go down the rocket and up the rocket, so you then lose time. So it's a visible display of behaviour and achievement. And there's quite a lot of research into emotional well-being and self-esteem of children and how this affects them long term. When I go into a classroom to do supply teaching and a 6-year-old child comes up to me and says, Miss, I'm thick. And it's the most saddest thing in the world, and you're thinking, you're 6. You know, something has gone wrong if a 6-year-old has given up. And in most of Europe, they're not in school really yet. But in England, that's their 3rd year in school. Sad. But even with older children, they're working to get A grades all the time. It's not necessary. So when I've taught teenagers are saying, well, is this on the exam syllabus? Rather than, this is really interesting, let's learn about this. Is this on the exam syllabus? Will this help me get an A? Because they realise that exam results are currency. They get them into sixth form college, they get them into university. And it's questioning that, I think, that is the only way to make changes. Maybe work with universities.
I'm just thinking now about motivation, because some kids are clearly motivated by the grades and that they want to get to university or have a good job. How can you motivate children to teach or to learn something which is not their natural interest, and really make them interested in some subject?
That's very challenging. Because it's very challenging, because it depends on what your ethics are. You could say, well, if you're using a much more an unschooling approach, or an approach which is totally child-led, if they're not interested, then you just let it be. For example, if they're not ready to learn to read, you do something else with them, or let them be involved in something else until they're ready to learn to read. If that's what they're wanting to do. But if you're a teacher in a classroom and everyone has to learn your subject, you've got to think about how you teach. So if the children are bored, or it's very difficult, you've got to think of making it more fun or more interesting. Or although that's hard work, you can't not think all singing and dancing. You can think about the learning styles. So if you're just giving them a lecture on a PowerPoint and they look bored at you, you think, well, can we turn this into a game? Can we do group work? Can we turn this upside down and do it totally differently? Can we ask them how they want to learn it? Can they be involved in the learning and the planning of the lesson?